Obviously, every offseason it's exciting and different. This year, through this whole lead up to the draft with, another 3 pick and the quarterbacks looming out there, was it even more, spicy or exciting or interesting for you and you guys?
No, I wouldn't say it's more spicy. When you look at the draft process, we want to attack it by one, we had our quarterback process, but we also have to look at what's the best player available. And we're happy that we landed with Abdul. We had 2 years of watching great tape with him, seeing him play off the ball, but also as a rusher, and then getting together with Shane and Dave and figuring out how can he be multiple in our defense and help our rush, because that was a big emphasis: rush, coverage, versatility, creating turnovers. So he helped solve that.
You've talked about that in the past. The idea of making sure the scouting staff, personnel staff, and the coaching staff are all on the same page. So if you're considering drafting a player, what will they do with that player?
Correct.
How important was it with Abdul, because he possesses such a diverse game that you want to see how he's going to be used in your system?
Yeah, good question, Art. So when you look at Abdul's versatility, you know that he can affect the quarterback from multiple positions, and that was the biggest thing. When you have Burns, KT, Abdul, how can you get our best players in our front 7 aligned and on the field as much as possible to help affect the quarterback? And I think when you look at his early tape at Penn State, you can see him playing from stacked alignment. When you have a premium athlete like Abdul, he can rush from a stacked linebacker position, or he can rush over a guard, or same thing with Burns, gives you the versatility to flip-flop, and with KT to create the best matchups on a week-to-week basis. So the ability to be multiple was really advantageous for us in terms of evaluating Abdul and actually seeing true application of it. It's not a hypothetical projection. We've seen it.
You
Go ahead, Jordan.
The quarterback process. I was just wondering, what's your contributions to that process? How do you look at it? Like, what was your part in that?
Yeah, Jordan, I'd say it was a comprehensive and arduous process where you kind of look at the coaching staff and the scouts. We're on it on 2 different timelines. When you look at the quarterbacks, from the scouting perspective, we have 2 years of a book of business of seeing these guys live, where the coaches get to the offseason and they're playing catch-up for us. And then we have the touch points of the all-star games, as well as the private workouts, the 30 visits, combine. And then when you have the process, the culmination as you kind of build this funnel, as you get later in the spring, you get to watch tape together, figure out what best fits, what are the non-negotiables, and understand what's going to play at a premium in the system and what can be emphasized based on Dave's vision. So the collaborative process, like I said, it's long. This is our 2nd year in a row doing a deep dive into it, and we're happy that Jackson's our guy and the way that we came away with it.
At what point did you process with Jaxson? At what point did you kind of say that guy could work for us?
Yeah, I think when you look at these players, I say they are their walking resume. So every benchmark matters and contributes to how they would fit for us. So obviously you have your 2 years of tape with Jaxson, and then you get to the Senior Bowl. We're lucky enough to have coaches that were involved in coaching there. But the cool part is when we got to Senior Bowl, we get to sit down with other players and you talk to them about, hey, if you have one guy you want to bring to the NFL with you, Jaxson was a common theme that came about, and it was players from different sides of the ball. So different sides of the ball, demographics. He's got kind of that everyman feel, which was really unique. And when you get through the spring process and we do our aptitude testing, and as well as a private workout, private dinners, he was a guy who checked all the boxes for us, and we're happy we were able to get him.
There was some conversations with Ole Miss players or guys just showing up in Mobile?
Guys at Mobile. Guys who played against him during the regular season, guys that were on the same team with him at Mobile but not at Ole Miss. And then when we get to your private workout, when you have all your skill guys show up for you at a private workout, it shows how they think about you as a teammate. When you go to the pro day and he's cheering on Walter Nolan on the bench press, and he's there early when he's not even doing the lifting portion of the workout, the guys see what kind of equity he builds up with them, and he's got that moxie where guys like to be around him. They gravitate towards him, and they see that he puts the work in. So it was a glove fit for us.
Brandon, every year at the draft, you hear somebody say, like, I thought this team told me they were going to draft me, and they didn't draft me. How difficult is the fine line to walk between showing a player love, telling him you're interested in him, and not leading him on to believe he's your guy that you're going to pick?
For sure. Like when you get to the combine or early in the process, you're still in the fact-finding part, right? You have a good feel, or you should have a good feel for what the player is on the field, how he could fit into your system from just a skill set standpoint. But then as you have these, call it off-season benchmarks, you figure out the intangibles. And you're negligent if you make that decision on a player before you go through the full, kitchen sink process with them. So it's, how can he process? What's the work ethic that he puts in? What are his outside of football interests? What drives him? What's his support system like? All those things contribute to really what's his floor, what's his ceiling. Like when you look at the end of the day, we're looking at the draft, there's a lot of risk analysis that goes on. And then you factor in the medical component. So you find some of that medical component stuff later on, which allows you to either creates you an opportunity for a player or it makes it more risky than not to take the player.
You were talking about risk analysis. What was the calculation with Jaxson? Like you're sitting at 3, you know you can get him to 3, and then obviously you take Abdul because everything you said he does, and just not knowing if Jackson's going to make it to wherever you ended up getting him.
Yeah, well, I think when you take, Abdul, man, he was, for us, the talent was a no-brainer. You look at opportunity costs, right? What are you giving up potentially for the player you're taking? And we, with the help from NASA, which is our analytics crew that we affectionately call them NASA, and you take our area scouts who they hear the word on the street. Scouts talk, and you hear from other buildings where guys may be on the board, and there's so much dead time in the spring before the draft. You start to hear where guys potentially may fall. And as we get all this information from agents, all third-party sources, we figure, okay, what's our best opportunity to strike? And we knew, once we got into the 20s, there was going to be an opportunity for Jaxson. It was going to be at what striking point, and then what would be the compensation we'd have to give up.
Brandon, you know how.
Go ahead, Art.
You and Joe have worked closely together now to this point. So in that point, you're in the draft room. We got to see it after the fact when the team released a video of Joe and just could see I don't know how I would describe it, but the emotions of when do we pull the trigger, when do we know it's the right opportunity, and then the relief when it finally hits. From someone who was in there but also just kind of had to watch it transpire, what did that feel like to know that here's a quarterback, and we know how important they are, that you guys like, but you just don't know until you know when you pull that trigger?
Yeah. The first thing, Art, I have to give my hats off for Joe for how systematic and streamlined our processes was, where nothing happened that we were surprised about. Leading up to the draft, we have these strategy sessions where we go through hypothetical scenarios. If we take a player early, if we trade back into one, what does that look like? And it's almost like no different than practicing. You take those reps, so when game day comes on draft day, you're ready for whatever. There's no curveball surprise where you're caught flat-footed. So I think when you get into the 20s, we knew there was going to be striking opportunities and potential deals that could have been done with multiple clubs. And we were happy that we were able to keep pick 65 and get Darius Alexander later. And these are some of those scenarios we worked through. So just for it to come to fruition, seeing that sigh of relief from Joe, everything that we planned for doesn't always go according to plan, but this one planned out the way that we did, said, hey, we may be in this position, what does it look like? And for the way it came together, we were really happy.
Brandon, you've been a part of an evaluation process of a lot of players. Evan Beal is a guy who this organization looked at and said he's a right tackle, he's an offensive tackle, and now he's making a position change. From a developmental and guy who looks at these guys and tries to project, why can he be a good guard in the NFL?
Yeah, I think when you look at the job description in our system for the guard, can he create movement at the line of scrimmage, and can he keep the interior firm in pass protection? We've seen Evan do it before. We need the flashes to be consistent, and he's been fully bought in with the move, and just knowing that leaning on your strength. There's not that many men that are as big as he is inside at guard, and playing with better balance. And Carm and James have been working with him throughout this spring, and Evan's putting in his work. So, we're excited to see what he shows when the pads come on in training camp, but I'm excited to see that he has the physical tools and skill set to transition inside. We just need to see it consistently.
He's obviously looks like a prototype tackle.
Yeah.
Does that 6'7" hurt him at guard, or can he use that? There's not many 6'7" guards, so how does that translate?
Yeah, and he's shorter than 6'7", but I get what you're saying. He's a big man. But I think when you look at the prototype size, you can look out throughout the league. You can look at offensive lines like Baltimore, etc. There are guys that, some of the guys in Philly that are larger than typical prototype. But it's, what's the job description and the technique? if you're asking him to pull out in space and a lot of redirecting at the second level, that is not his game. But he is a power broker. He's a guy that can create movement. He's a guy that can absorb power and anchor in pass protection. And, we just have to keep improving the technique and working on his hand usage and his balance. And James and Carm are committed to that.
With Darius and Scatterman.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, Brent, we have Evan Barnes new today.
Good to meet you.
Likewise. With Darius and Cam Scatterman, I'm just curious, you mentioned getting 2 years of tape on Jaxson and Abdul. I'm curious, what's the process when you look at a guy like Darius who's at a mid-major school, as you say, and then Scatterman having really one big year? What's the kind of process evaluating them and seeing kind of how they can fit with maybe less film, I guess?
Yeah, so this is really the moment. It's the tip. It's a hats off to our area scouts because it's the early identification. Like, they do a lot of the unseen work. When you look at Darius Alexander, you look at Brendan Profit, identifying him early at Toledo. When we see him play against Pittsburgh and he zone drops and has an interception, and finding out the background that he once was an offensive lineman, that he had coordinator changes, that he became a father really early. A lot of the hidden work that he's done and obstacles that he's overcome and come on the right side, him showing up at Mobile wasn't the first time we're getting exposure to him. So it created an early, touch point and checkpoint. And then when you look at Scat, same thing. We were hearing things about Scat when he's at Sac State, and you look at our area scouts, Hannah Brunette, Jeremy, all those two were really the driving force in terms of identifying Scat early, and not just the highlights and the broken tackles that you see, but the unseen stuff at practice, saying, hey, he's got some things in the pass games that are untapped. And then you watch the, call it Texas game, and you see him utilizing the pass game a little bit more. And when we go through the process with him, we weren't worried about 40 time or all those other things because we had so many touch points and live looks in practice that he wasn't a guy that popped on the scene late. We took him through the fall. We got to see him live, and we're happy. And that's the thing is where we preach to our scouts, early identification. Scout with your eyes, not with your ears. And both the scouts on the West Coast and Brendan Profit, with the Toledo work, and along as our other scouts, they did a really good job, and it's part of our our core values that Dennis Hickey driving the scouting process on the college side in terms of overseeing a lot of the calendar work of how we divide up the labor of going to schools early, the amount of looks each school gets, the amount of live looks each school gets. So there's a method to the madness. Just it's a lot of unseen work that goes on in the fall.
Brandon, Russell Wilson's body of work speaks for itself in the league, but what convinced you all that at this point in his career he'd be a good fit for what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, well, Russell, he's been a guy that when you look at what he's done from Seattle to Pittsburgh, it was a mesh and fit for our scheme. We knew we needed to push the ball down the field a lot more, and you guys have seen it in practice. That's an ability and knack that is unique for us. And you look at the leadership component. When you see what Russ has done since he's got here, within the first 2 weeks, he's bringing Jalen Hyatt out to L.A. and they're working out privately, or he's getting all the skill guys together down in Atlanta. Earlier this week, scheduling a dinner with the O-line and running backs. Like that type of leadership component, because you remember, our nucleus has been really young throughout our time here. And him having that veteran leadership on the offensive side, as well as having the ability to complement what Dave wants to get done from the quarterback position, I thought it was a really good fit.
Brandon, you guys have brought back 91% of your, let's call them distributors. Guys play 30% or more of offensive teams. 91%, which is a really high number for a team that won 3 games. Most teams would think you'd reset the roster. Why did you do that? Is that a faith in the guys you have that they didn't play to their peak? Is that a sign of youth? Like, what do you see as bringing back so much of a team that only won 3 games?
All right, so that's the last thing that you mentioned, sign of youth. That was the big thing when we talk about that 91%. I think we only have 6 players left on the roster from when we got here in 2022. But look how young the nucleus is. So there are strategic additions in terms of via free agency. You look at the secondary. We had one of the youngest secondaries in the league, and you drop off, Javon Holland, where we loved his character even coming back out of Oregon and knowing the job he did down in Miami. And then you look at Paulson Adebo, a guy who, if it wasn't for injury, would have been amongst the league leaders in interceptions last year, having strong character, work ethic coming out of, Stanford. So you look at 2 guys that can help shape the secondary, and then you look at veteran pieces that we added on, the defensive line and also in the front 7. So whether it's Golston or Ledbetter or Roy Robinson Harris, guys that have skins on the wall that can help complement our young group. And then obviously redoing the quarterback room with having both Russ and Jameis, experience was paramount. So I think, when you look at our youth, that is our nucleus, but help supplementing it with leadership and versatility and guys that can help supplement not just an age and leadership standpoint, but a versatility and skill set standpoint was really important for us.
You mentioned the 40-yard dash before and not worrying so much about stats 40 time. How much has having in-game GPS times and acceleration per second, how much has that contributed to the scouting process and evaluation process?
So when you look at GPS data, the NGS data, all the game day metrics, it's all a tool in our process. Like I mentioned NASA before, our analytics department, Joe does a phenomenal job of including them not only in the draft process but in free agency. And we can extrapolate certain metrics of, hey, does it correlate with the scouting report? When our pro director Chris Rossetti or any of our pro scouts has a report on a guy in free agency and you say, hey, he has third level speed and he can pull away, or he can do, he has sideline to sideline speed and he can close and cut off backside. Does the data is it contradictory, or is it giving it evidence and support? So when you look at the data in itself, we're always finding ways to really call it poke holes and have checks and balances in our processes. So it's a supplemental tool, and we're going to continue to do it. We're going to continue to implement AI, which we've talked about earlier this week, and they're all things where if you're not taking advantage of all those tools, there's another team who is, and you're being negligent. And Joe's been really great in terms of opening the lines of communication and being collaborative when we get to add the chance to add different sources and tools to help us make decisions.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, guys.
You sound like us, Brandon.